This program that is supposedly for black people, because that's what Brandon Johnson said, right? When you ask, what are you doing for black people? Well, here's what we're doing. It doesn't even exist. It's not real. As Deneen Grant says, this is bull jive. Y'all know I don't curse on this channel. Keep it professional. But this is bull jive. He's promising you something that doesn't exist yet. But now let's get back into Brandon Johnson, right? I want to get back into Brandon Johnson, and I want you to hear from the horse's mouth what he had to say concerning what he's doing for black people, right? Because we always ask the question, I asked the question here, or I should say I always make the statement that they're not doing anything for you. We vote blue religiously, but they don't do anything for us. Well, Brandon Johnson has the answer to that statement and or question that I always pose or state. So let me play what he had to say. The post reads as such for starters, right? Let me read the post first. The post reads, when we say bring Chicago home, we are bringing resources to Chicago's unhoused population and every community in need. Bring Chicago home will create a sustainable and permanent funding source to facilitate supportive housing and address homelessness all across our city. Now let's hear from the king's mouth what he had to say concerning what he's doing for black Chicagoans.
Making investments in affordable housing is another critical and essential focus of my administration. Housing is a human right, and homelessness is up 12% since 2019, and Black Chicagoans account for almost 70% of the unhoused population. And so whenever there are individuals asking, what are we doing for Black people? Well, they don't have to look any further. Amen. That's right. Making investments.
I don't believe one word coming out of Brandon Johnson's mouth when he speaks and when he discusses and talks about Black Chicago. And when you say, what are you doing for Black Chicago? This is what we're doing. I don't believe anything that comes out of this man's mouth. And the reason I don't believe anything that comes out of his mouth is this right here. Now, bring Chicago home. What is bring Chicago home? What is this that he's speaking of when he says bring Chicago home, Brandon Johnson? Well, I want to show you what he means. Okay, so here's the website, bringchicagohome.org. And what I want to do is just scroll all the way to the bottom here, so we get a little bit more of a detailed understanding and explanation of what this is when Brandon Johnson is talking about this Bring Chicago Home initiative that's supposed to be something that will largely benefit Black Americans. Allegedly, that is, right? Allegedly, given the statistic that he laid out concerning 70% of the homeless population being Black. So it reads, with this funding, we can create permanent housing with supportive services for those who need it most. Permanent housing with supportive services is a model that combines affordable housing with wraparound services needed to create long-term stability. This means preservation of existing housing, creation of new housing vouchers, other potential models that combine affordable housing with services. So when people are housed, they stay in their homes. Now, what stood out to me when I was reading this for myself the first time is this portion right here. This last bullet point, where it reads, other potential models that combine affordable housing with services. When I saw it said other potential models, it made me think to myself, this isn't something that's flushed out at all. This isn't something that's fully flushed out, because what do you mean other potential models? What are those models? And that's something that I thought about for a moment. It was on my mind for a quick second, and then I let it go. And then after I dug just to kind of a little bit more, because I wanted to see, what is this really all about? Maybe in a little bit more detail. Maybe there's another article that covers this. Well, I come across this website here from Hyde Park Herald. And here's what they had to say concerning Bring Chicago Home, a proposed tax and fund to fight homelessness heads to Chicago voters. I'm going to repeat that again. Bring Chicago Home, a proposed tax and fund to fight homelessness heads to Chicago voters. I'm pausing on purpose just to see if maybe any of you get the hint of where I'm going with this, because this is something that he's apparently and allegedly doing for Black people that's going to help Black people, right? Well, let's carry on. Let's read a little bit. Voters will decide in March whether to give Chicago City Council the power to raise the tax on sales of $1 million properties to help combat homelessness. The binding referendum question, known as Bring Chicago Home, was approved by Chicago City Council on Tuesday, November 7th, in a 32-17 vote. All three local city council members, Alderman Lamont Robinson, Alderman Desmond Yancey, and Alderman Jeanette Taylor, voted in support of the resolution to add the referendum to the March 19 primary ballots. If more than half of voters do support the measure, City Council will be tasked with crafting and approving an ordinance in the spring. This ordinance would establish the tax rates and designate where the funds will be spent. What's my point here? If you haven't gotten it already, this doesn't even exist yet. This program that is supposedly for Black people, because that's what Brandon Johnson said, right? When you ask, what are you doing for Black people? Well, here's what we're doing. It doesn't even exist. It's not real. As Deneen Grant says, this is bull jive. Y'all know I don't curse on this channel. Keep it professional. But this is bull jive. He's promising you something that doesn't exist yet. He's promising you, he's not promising you anything. He told you what he's doing for you is something that isn't a real thing. It doesn't exist. It hasn't even been fully thought out yet. There's still work for the city council to do to even determine how this thing is going to work, even if it's voted for by half the city. But this is still dependent on whether or not Chicago citizens choose to vote for this. And then city council still has to figure this out. Yet Brandon Johnson is telling you this is what I'm doing for Black people. How can you be doing something for me when you're offering me something that does not exist? Do you see how shady these people are? But I'm spreading misinformation though, right? I'm just, as you all know, because none of you have ever seen me in real life. Some of you might be new to this channel. You might think that TD is a real person. TD is not a real person. I am not a real person. I am a Russian bot powered by artificial intelligence and chat GPT. That's what I am. I don't exist. And I was created to simply push misinformation. And that's what I do on this channel. I push misinformation. That's what they'll tell you. But you heard out of Brandon Johnson's own mouth. When you ask me what I'm doing for Black Chicagoans, here's what I'm doing. And then when I show you what he's doing, you see what he claims that he's doing doesn't even exist yet. Yet he was able to pull $95 million out of his behind for so-called migrants, folks who didn't even vote for him to get in because they weren't even in the country yet. Now, it's only a matter of time because if you leave it up to Brandon Johnson, before he gets out of office, non-citizens will be voting in the city's local elections. I guarantee you that by hook or by crook, he's going to pass that before he gets out of office. I can see it coming. I can see it coming. But folks who didn't even vote him into office are getting the money that they need in order to establish themselves in the city of Chicago, in order to establish resources that they need in the city of Chicago. So-called migrants are getting what they need. Meanwhile, the citizens of Chicago, and particularly and specifically Black Chicagoans, who make up 70% of the homeless population, You're not getting what you need. You have to wait for everyone to vote on whether or not you can get what you need. But Brandon Johnson was able to pull $95 million out of his behind for so-called migrants. But I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't understand politics, and I'm pushing misinformation. That's what's happening over here. Now, here's the other thing also.